Good morning. This is the Ancient and Medieval History Lecture for Thursday, the 16th of December, 2021. We had talked about Greek philosophy, about Socrates, the teacher who asked impertinent questions and was sentenced to death for it, who thought that asking the right questions could unlock most of the answers that you would need in life, and that an unexamined life was not worth living. About Plato and his notion that reality was, in fact, a world of perfect forms interacting perfectly with one another, and how this reality is not what we live in. We live in a carnival mirror echo reality where everything is distorted. And the only way to appreciate reality is to visualize it, to imagine it. And then once you imagine each form in its perfection, imagine what they would be like interacting. That's the way you achieve an understanding. Plato's Republic is a society based on these principles. Education is designed to bring out your talents, your traits, to introduce you to what you're good at and what you love doing, so that you can find your perfect job. And in Plato's Republic, which is not the Roman or our Republic, you will see people being drawn to everything from sculpting to ditch digging to being the philosopher king, based on their innate natural talents. So in this sense, it's ideal. Aristotle had a different notion than Plato. Aristotle said, if you want to understand something, observe it. Observe it in its natural form. Observe how it interacts. Observe how it feels, or how it handles crises, and how it handles opportunities, and how it behaves in a variety of circumstances. And if you do this, you'll develop an understanding of whatever it is you're observing. In fact, it's best to observe in a focused, disciplined manner. So what you should do is come up with a series of, you come up with a hypothesis that you're going to test with a series of experiments. You run the experiments, you go where the data leads, and you base a theory upon that experimental data. Aristotelian philosophy applied to studying the natural world is the scientific method. Aristotle also made little logic Legos, syllogisms, three-part logic statements. Now, if you put in good information, all men are mortal, Socrates was a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, you can do a lot with building an argument rooted in logic and reason with a bunch of syllogisms, like you can make a nice building with a bunch of bricks. On the other hand, if you give erroneous assumptions to your syllogisms, like camel cigarettes soothe your throat, Jocko smoked camels for 25 years, therefore Jocko is more healthy for having smoked camels, that's a situation where garbage in, garbage out. It's like programmed. If you program your computer with a bad assumption, your data is going to be bad. We talked about Greek art and its realistic idealism, or its idealistic realism, call it what you will. If they did a sculpture of any of us, it would look like us, but on our best day, without the flaws, without the scars, without the pimples or warts or weird twitchy things. It would be our best self, maybe a self we've never seen because it's never been, sort of the self we might have been, if not for whatever it is that disfigured us, like reality. So now we're moving into science. How is it that the Greeks claim to know that the world is round? Well, they suspected before this, but a scientist named Eratosthenes of Alexandria proves it. Here's what he does. Alexandria is going to prove the shape and size of the world with 2 sticks, a slave, and a calendar. Sounds like a joke. priest, a rabbi, and an imam go into a bar. Which is kind of funny because imams aren't supposed to drink. Maybe he'll have a Shirley Temple. In any event, how is this Greek going to find out what shape and size the world is with a slave, 2 sticks, and a calendar? Here's how. He lives in Alexandria, Egypt, which is... Oh, I should move this. Here, there's a city called Syene, which is round about where the edge of the map is. What Eratosthenes is going to do is have 2 sticks carved of the exact same wood, as close to the exact same grain, of precisely the same length. He's going to keep one. He's going to give one to a scientist assistant slave. Today they're called interns. And this scientist assistant slave is going to travel south for months until he gets to Syene. Now, at noontime, on the longest day of the year, both men have had to prepare a perfectly level space. No obstructions, no deformations, no little undulations, straight, flat, and level. And that's easy enough to do because the Greeks had levels. If you don't know what a level is, ask somebody who knows something about tools. Basically, it'll be a liquid tube filled mostly with liquid with a single bubble in it, and if the bubble matches up to the center, then you have a level object. If the bubble goes to one side or the other, then you don't. And what each man is going to do is place the stick absolutely vertically, which you can also determine using a level or a 90-degree angle, a cube, anything like that. It's easy enough to get a 90-degree angle. If you're a scientist or a scientist-slave assistant, and at the high point of the sun, you are going to measure the shadow cast by that stick. So, Eratosthenes' shadow on Midsummer's Day, longest day of the year, at noon, when the sun is highest in the sky, is this long. The slave goes back and brings back the word that at that time his shadow was only this long. How on earth can Eratosthenes determine the shape and size of the earth? Well, here's how. Let's assume that the sun is in a fixed position in the sky, which is a good enough assumption if you have a geocentric view of the universe, where the earth is at the center of all things. We're also going to assume the earth is round. Now, Syene, south of Alexandria. If you have 2 sticks of equal length at Syene and at Alexandria, they're both the same length, they're both 90 degrees at an angle to local level, then because the earth is round and the sun is higher in the sky, the shadow here will be noticeably less than the shadow here. All you need to do then with geometry is figure out the difference in the angles and take into account the distance between Syene and Alexandria. With these findings, Eratosthenes determines incontrovertibly that our world is round, because the sun casts a noticeably shorter shadow at Syene, all other factors being equal. If the earth was flat, the shadows would be the same length, but the earth is not flat, therefore the shadows are different. With this knowledge, Eratosthenes further measures. You hand me that book, the big one with the colorful maps? Yes, please. Thank you. Okay. He further measures the size of the world. Now, in measuring the size of the world, he actually gets a remarkably accurate figure. A couple hundred years later, Claudius Ptolemy, during the height of the Roman Empire, also in Alexandria, produces this Mappa Mundi, this world map, which shows Europe, Africa, and Asia. And this map is based on travelers' tales of India and China. And the figures for the size of the earth developed by Eratosthenes with his geometry. We're not done. Educated people knew the shape and size of the world because they knew about Eratosthenes' experiment. And that information I don't think it's going to fall. That information is later used by Christopher Columbus in his arguments that if we sail west, we arrive in the east. If we sail west, we arrive in the east. Because Eratosthenes underestimated the size of the world by about 2/5. So, everything to the left of this pole isn't there. Well, most everything. A little bit of the Pacific over here. So the Earth is actually 2/5 larger. Well, Eratosthenes' estimate is 2/5 smaller than it actually is. So it's 2/5, 40% smaller. Why? Eratosthenes was not stupid. Eratosthenes had very good information about almost everything. Almost everything. This is going to show you how one little figure can completely mess up the most complex of mathematical equations. Can anyone figure out, which of the bits of data Eratosthenes cannot accurately measure? Can he measure the poles? Yes or no? Class?
Yes.
Yes. Class. I expect everyone to answer. If you answer wrong, we'll laugh at you and you'll never get a date again. Can he measure the poles? Yes or no?
Yes.
Can he measure the shadows and the slave? Yes or no?
Yes.
Can he measure the distance between Syene and Alexandria?
Yes.
No. He guesstimates because he has to. We are talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles across desert with a river winding. He thinks he knows, but he has to guesstimate how far Alexandria is from Syene. That is the Q factor. That is the unknown. So he gives the best information he can based on his slave's report and the other travelers' reports about how long it takes to get there and back. Unfortunately for his measurements, he underestimates the distance. Therefore, the Earth is smaller by his calculations than we think it actually is today. And since we send spacecraft around the world every day, it's kind of important to know how big the world is, otherwise we'll plow into it. No GPS in Eratosthenes' times. Not even any trigonometrical maps that the 19th century had. No, it's a guesstimate. So you see how he reaches the shape of the world and determines the size of the world, but why his estimate is off, and therefore why Claudius Ptolemy's map does not include any space for the Americas or for a wide Pacific Ocean. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, now we talk about Archimedes. Archimedes is famous for his hydrodynamic studies. That is, he studies liquids, particularly water. Archimedes' most famous contribution is when he takes a bath. He's not a filthy guy. This isn't the point. It's just funny to say it that way. Archimedes is trying to work out water displacement. So, one of the things he's going to do when he gets the idea is he's going to have a bathtub precisely built so that he can measure the exact volume of space that can be filled by water in this tub. So he has the volume. He then measures how much water it takes to fill that volume. He has the weight of the water. He has the volume of the water. Now what? Well, he weighs himself. He has his weight, and he has as good an approximation of his volume as you need. Then, slowly, carefully, so as not to make too many waves, he gets into the tub and carefully but fully immerses himself so that all of him, at least for one moment, is underwater. What is going to happen to the water in this non-modern tub?
It's gonna fill.
Yeah, it's going to slosh over the sides. So Archimedes gets into the tub. It sloshes over the sides, but again, he's trying not to make waves. And then he gets out, dries himself off, and takes out all the water in the tub, measuring what's left. Eureka! He says, because now he knows how much water he displaces, and he can develop understandings between does a human with the same volume displace the same amount of water as a balloon? Does a human displace the same amount of water with the same volume as a piece of iron? Does density of the object play into displacement? So he's doing a bunch of things with water. And remember, Archimedes also comes up with a screw-shaped object that actually carries water from a lower to a higher body. So he actually develops a machine that doesn't require a slave to dip a bucket in the river, swing it around, and dump the bucket in your irrigation fields. With Archimedean screws, you can do that much more efficiently. You still need a slave to turn the screw, though. So, Eratosthenes measures the shape and size of the world. Archimedes takes a bath. Claudius Ptolemy later maps the world based on his understanding. And it does include the continents of the old world, Europe, Asia, Africa. It includes India. It even includes an area where he thinks China is, or whatever he would call that Chinese area. Now, if there are no questions, we go to geometry. Oh, Oh, geometry. Geometry is the math that I passed in high school without constant pain. Just a lot of pain. Algebra was much worse for me. I hate equations. I bleeping hate them. How do you make both sides equal? Grenades! Yeah, that'll work. I hate algebra. And I never learned more advanced math. I don't speak math. So all of you, by the time you graduate from here, will have a far superior understanding of mathematics than I ever will. On the other hand, I learned basic arithmetic from nuns, so I'm pretty good at doing certain types of mathematical operations in my head. Because nuns know how to motivate you. Oh yeah. Nuns be scary. And lovely and wonderful, but scary. So, Pythagoras is one of the Greek geometers. I don't believe I didn't write this down, but I'm going to write it down now. The other one is Euclid. Beep. Okay.
Euclidean geometry.
Pythagoras loves triangles. Triangles, triangles, triangles. If there is a mystery in the universe, Pythagoras will try to solve it with triangles. Do any of you know the Pythagorean theorem? And what does that mean?
If you take a right triangle, the side of the shorter side of the three sides of the hypotenuse is equal to the shorter side of the side squared.
Okay. So that is something about the proportion of right triangles, which is interesting, and it's actually useful in building buildings that don't collapse. Okay? So you make sure that your pillar is standing at a right triangle to the ground. Again, right angles. It's possible even that, I don't remember if Pythagoras or Eratosthenes comes first, but that they used that system to make sure that their poles were standing straight up. In any event, there's Euclid. And Euclid has a theorem which I'm sure has a name, but I've forgotten it. It's an if-then assumption. If A, line A, or line segment A, is parallel to B, line or line segment B, and B, line segment B, is parallel to C, line or line segment C, then A is parallel to C. Do any of you remember what this is called? It is a Euclidean idea. It's a basic principle of math. It's one of the few things I really remember. What?
Postulate.
Euclid's postulate?
There's postulates and theorems like that.
Okay. Well, if line A is parallel to line B and line B is parallel to line C, then line C must be parallel to line A. But that cannot be proven. It is an assumption. And when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. So, he said donkey. Yeah, I didn't name my political party after that, but somebody did. Was that a slam at Democrats? In any event, I'm so evil. Because what's an elephant? Well, an elephant never forgets. In any case, H.P. Lovecraft, a writer of horror, of cosmic horror about 100 years ago, wrote stories about the universe not having been created by a loving God, but having been created by alien, monstrous, elemental powers like Cthulhu and Hastur the Unspeakable and Cthesagua and Azathoth, and all of these monstrous things that you couldn't really call gods because gods make sense to human beings, and these things are so alien to us they don't make any sense. But what distinguishes the artifacts they leave on Earth is that they are made using non-Euclidean geometry. In other words, a geometry that produces an architecture where if line A and line B are parallel, and line B and line C are parallel, that doesn't mean line A and line C are parallel. Interesting stuff to me. Anyway, Greek geometry is Greek math. Any thoughts or insights on the utility of geometry? You know what it's really useful for? Artillery. And rocketry. Now, geometry can tell you if you have a gun with so much powder and a shell, so much weight, and it's rifled in such a way, and you launch it through air that's a certain temperature with a certain amount of wind, where that shell is going to end, where it's going to land, which is important if you're lobbing explosives across a battlefield, because it would be just as easy, oops, to land the shells on your own troops, which does happen from time to time. It's called friendly fire or fratricide, and it's bad. And it happens in every war. In every war, somebody screws up and drops a bomb on the wrong spot, or drops mortar shells on the wrong spot, drops grenades on the wrong spot with a mortar, or drops artillery shells on the wrong spot. And you don't want to be on that spot. It's bad. Okay, medicine. Do any of you know what this is?
Squiggly line. Oh, it's the. It's on the ambulance. Yeah.
Where do you see this symbol a lot?
Ambulance.
Ambulances, hospitals.
Oh.
This is a caduceus. A caduceus is a symbol of healing. And it has to do with a couple of Greek gods, one of which is represented by the staff, the other of which is represented by the winged serpent. It represents healing. Do any of you know more about that? You have read the Iliad. Do any of you know more about the caduceus than I just told you? Yeah.
Isn't it Hermes' staff?
I think it is. Yep. And whose snake is it? Aeschylus?
I think so.
I think it's Aeschylus. So, it's a mixture of Hermes and Aeschylus, but this is the symbol of healing. I probably drew it a little bit wrong. Hippocrates understood something. Doctors are healers and what? And experimenters. A good doctor of any age, wants to figure out a healthy human body so that they can figure out what's wrong with an unhealthy human body. Make sense? The problem is, for doctors, that healthy people don't go to the doctor and volunteer to be experimental test subjects. It's also a problem that if you want to cut a person up, people won't let you cut themselves up because they'll die in writhing, horrible agony. So, what do? You get cadavers. But cadavers aren't just anonymous people. That's Uncle Bob! You just dug up Uncle Bob and sliced his innards out and cut them up like some ghoul. Being a doctor has always been difficult. And a lot of people in ancient Greece began to suspect that if they went to the doctor would experiment on them rather than heal them. For example, I used to work for a pharmaceutical company, Bristol Myers Squibb. When you test a new drug or medicine or whatever, you do some trials, double-blind trials. And you've got two groups or more of test subjects. One group gets the new medication or the drug. The other group gets a placebo. Do any of you know what a placebo is? Do you know what a placebo is? Yeah?
Where they don't really give you drug and see how differently people react.
Yeah. So if today, God forbid, you had a terminal illness, you were going to die anyway, and you decided, well, on my way out, I'm going to swing at the disease for science. You volunteer for a test. And they're going to try an experimental drug that isn't proven. We don't know the side effects. We don't know anything about it. But if you're going to die anyway, why not? So a lot of people in a situation like that say, yeah, let's do this. Some of them are given the new drug. Some of them think they're getting the new drug, but they're getting a sugar pill, or they're getting injected with saline solution. In other words, they're getting nothing. And what the doctors will do, what the scientists will do, is they'll compare. They'll compare the deterioration of a normal patient who's in the study, who think they're getting medicated, with people who are actually getting medicated to see what happens. And by the way, sometimes you don't want the medication because it has side effects like, I don't know, your skin suddenly turns to stone, you get petrified. That doesn't usually happen outside of Medusa myths, but it could happen. You could take a drug that suddenly had plants growing out of your ears. You don't know. You could get a fungal infection that turned you into a crinoid. That's a Doctor Who monster. You don't know because it's an experimental drug. You're taking a chance either way of getting nothing or of getting something that might work, or it might give you toes that are the size of Cleveland. You don't know, which is big, but it's not as big as LA. So Hippocrates wants to encourage people to believe in the medical profession. He wants the medical profession to be clear about healing. So Hippocrates, with the priesthoods that deal with healing, work out an oath. And the beginning of the Hippocratic Oath is, first, do no harm. What that means is that in the course of treating illnesses, a doctor will not use their patients as test subjects in a harmful fashion. That if you've got a sniffle, I'm not going to take your appendix out.
Darn it.
They beat me to it! Those thieves! Good for you. I do. I hope it's okay. That's hilarious. Not that you don't, that I would ask you and use you as an example, and you don't have one. The idea of the Hippocratic Oath is to assure everyone, patient, doctors, everyone, that the purpose of a person going to a healer is not, hey, experiment on me, it'll be fun. No, it's please heal me. So first, do no harm means that you're not going to do anything to make this person's life worse. And that means that you're going to tend to restrict your treatments to those things that you know will help. Now, not every modern doctor swears the Hippocratic Oath, which is creepy. I'd like my doctor to. I hope my doctor has. I admit I haven't asked the question, but I think I will. Have you sworn as a part of your medical training the Hippocratic Oath? Are you on record? And if not, I'm going to think about maybe finding someone else. Yeah.
Wait, I thought if you were practicing, I thought you had to swear.
Used to be that case, but I've heard from doctors, at least in Connecticut and Maine, that wasn't taken so seriously anymore. It was sort of old fuddy-duddy stuff. But I don't think it's fuddy-duddy. I think it's kind of important. I do. Now, Galen is a Roman Empire era Greek who's going to map the body. So where are your various body parts? Galen maps them. Now, there is also the concept that the Greeks have of the four humors. We're not talking, sarcastic comedy, ethnic comedy, physical comedy. It's not that kind of humor. The four humors are different kinds of liquid in the human body. So there's blood. You could be a sanguine person, which means that you have a certain kind of character, sort of blood-oriented. And you could be choleric because you have a certain type of bile. There's black bile, there's yellow bile, there's blood. What's the fourth one? I should know this. I teach this every year, and I forget every year. What?
Isn't it phlegm?
Phlegm. Yes. It's spelled phlegm, but it's phlegm. So there's phlegm, there's black bile, there's yellow bile, and there is blood. And what the Greeks believed was that everyone has a balance of these four humors, and if they're in proper proportion to one another, you're healthy. But if you have an excess of blood, You need to be bled in order to be healed. So the basis of the concept of the medieval treatment of, oh, somebody's sick, let's cut open their veins and stick leeches on them to suck out the extra blood and reduce their blood to a normal proportion, which to us seems absolutely bug nuts crazy, that comes from this notion of the four humors. So, any questions about that? Yeah.
I read this book a while back, and I can't remember the name, but it was fascinating. It was about a girl who was one of the only people who refused the leech treatment.
Yep.
And everyone thought she was crazy and she was gonna die. But
She's lucky she wasn't burned as a witch. So what happened?
She ended up dying because the mob revolted and drowned her.
Yep. Yep. Oh, God. Whenever you see a mob of people coming your way, get the hell out. No, mobs are, yeah, unless you're Shrek, in which case you can fight them off. If you're the Hunchback of Notre Dame, not so much. Mobs are like human locusts. Yeah.
Isn't there, like they did that, and they also had the concept, there was a concept that, like, your blood is infected, so you have to get the infection out of you.
Yeah, yeah.
So, like,
They had to suck out the evil
yeah,
humors.
like, George Washington died, because, like, he just kept taking blood.
Yeah, yeah.
He got sick, and they just kept
He was very old when that happened, though.
Yeah,
Fair enough, but it wasn't the wooden teeth that killed him. No. Although that would be a scary thought right there. You mix the magic of druids and wooden teeth, and you suddenly, you get your enemy, and you arrange to have wooden teeth given to him, but they have a spell on them, so you program the spell to go off while he's sleeping, and the wooden teeth start. That's horrible. I'm a dungeon master who plays Dungeons and Dragons. I have to think of this stuff. And yes, I'm going to do that to my players in some way, shape, or form, because that's creepy. I love it.
You were given wooden teeth, but then they started eating your flesh.
Oh, it's awful. What kind of sick? Oh, let's my kind. Okay, drama. I'm going to tell you about theater and thespians. Thespians are actors. The Romans and Greeks thought actors were lower than prostitutes in the social order. They would be amazed that today we glorify movie stars and rock stars and rap stars and all that stuff because they're merely performers. What do? They play pretend for a living. They're really good at going when they're not really afraid. They're good at crying on cue. This is why I love seeing actors when they're public speaking or they're on trial or something. I could mention the name of an actor who discharged a weapon and killed someone and went on camera and cried because he says it's not his fault, Baldwin. And, the trial hasn't happened yet and yada, 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 but understand he's acting at you. He's acting. That's his job. His job is to emote on cue. And at that moment, his job, he wanted to make people feel sympathy for him. So he cried in the middle of an interview.
You get a prop gun, so it's like, oh, it's not loaded. The first thing you do is aim it at a direction.
Yeah. No, you don't. Look, everyone knows you never aim a weapon unless you intend to use it, which means you don't aim weapons at people. If you're in a movie and you're filming, which he wasn't, that's a different story. You've got a prop master, then you go bang, bang, and there are caps that go off or whatever. But he was messing around. He was messing around on stage. And no, people who know about guns know that you don't really go, hey, Bob! No, it's not just that poor extra that was killed. I believe Brandon Lee, Bruce Lee's son, was killed that way while filming The Crow. Don't do that. One of the worst moments of my life when I realized I was cleaning my battle rifle. I had taken it apart, and there was still a bullet in it. I am such an idiot. I am so lucky that I didn't kill my wife or my brother-in-law or my sister-in-law or one of their pets. We were over there, we were watching movies, and I cleaning the weapon, and I thought I had cleared it. But I was an idiot, and I didn't. And it's only by the grace of God that bullet remained safe in the weapon until I took it out manually. Oh my God, that was horrifying. Don't ever do that. Oh, and ever since then, before then I thought I was, but I just didn't pay attention.
My dad's cousin actually like that's what happened with kids. The gun was still shaved. Like, just,
Is your cousin still alive?
yeah, she's still alive. She
Okay,
just has a
just-
weird eye.
Yeah. I have one eye. I sympathize. But my eye is natural. It just doesn't connect to the brain. God bless. We lived next door to a group of kids and their parents, and the boy with a pencil turned his sister into a person who had only one eye. And it was completely accidental, but he was messing around with a pointy pencil. Be careful. Anyway, actors. So, I'm just going to say this right now. Aeschylus and Sophocles are tragedians. They do tragedy. They do stories of misery and suffering, pathos and horror. And Euripides and Aristophanes are comedians. They do comedy. They tell stories that make you laugh and fun and question. I'm going to come back to Sophocles later. Sophocles' most famous play is Oedipus. Oedipus, the story of a man who returns to Thebes, and on the way to Thebes, he encounters a guy on the road, and they get into a tussle, and he kills the guy, and then he recovers from the fight and goes to Thebes, and he encounters the queen who's just been widowed, and he marries the queen who's older than him, but heck, she's the queen, and the Sphinx comes, and Oedipus saves the town from the Sphinx. And then Oedipus realizes that the man he killed on the road was his father, and his mother is the wife that he took, who's the queen. Horrible. Electra does the story with the roles reversed. In any event, Sophocles. Literature. Homer, you may have heard of him. Writes the Iliad, writes the Odyssey. Epic plays that talk about the values of civilization, Xenia and Arete and all that stuff. Yeah. Hesiod. Hesiod writes a book called Works and Days. And Works and Days is sort of a halfway point between mythology and actual history, or sort of a study of the cultures around you. Works and Days mixes cultural information and mythology. Then there's Aesop. Aesop's fables. The tortoise and the hare. So they're going to have a race, and everyone laughs at the tortoise, especially the rabbit. Bugs Bunny did a cartoon with this. If we have time at the end, I'll show it to you. So the tortoise and the hare are at the starting point, and they start, and the rabbit, boom, and the turtle just goes, because he's a turtle. However, the rabbit is so overconfident, he decides about 2/3 of the way through the race, he's going to stop and take a nap. Stupid! Don't do that, because the tortoise just kept going and beat the hare. And it shows you, don't be overconfident, don't have contempt for your opponent, and always work hard. There's the story of the fox and the grapes. The fox is on the ground and tells everyone who will listen to him, God, look at those grapes up there. Only stupid people eat grapes. You know, grapes make you flatulent. Grapes are bad. Grapes are still some of the worst. I'm so glad I don't reach those grapes. What's the fox actually doing? What's he doing? Yeah.
Trying to get people.
Well, you could, on the surface, it sounds like he's trying not to get people to eat those grapes, but
he's just mad that he can't reach them.
Yeah. He can't have the grapes. So the grapes must stink on ice. And they must be sour grapes. And this is where you get the term sour grapes. Because the fox says, oh, those grapes, they're so sour. No, he wants the grapes, but he can't have them. So he basically insults them to everyone who will listen. And that speaks about the bitterness and scriminess sometimes of human nature. We don't know if Aesop was actually real or if he's sort of the guy that people attribute old myths to. I like the idea that he's real. Now, in sport, the Olympic Games, every 4 years, every Greek city-state has peace, and they go to the Olympics and they compete at the foot of Mount Olympus, and the wrestlers and the runners and the discus throwers and the javelin throwers, but not the javelin catchers, because that would be the worst sport in the world. Got it! don't ever be the javelin catcher at a track and field event. Bad idea. It's such a sick joke. He's so horrible. Yes, I am. And the marathon, of course, is a cross-country race, 26 miles, in honor of the Phidippides and the first marathon. They still do marathons today. At Boston's marathon a few years ago, some lovely terrorists, the Tsarnaev brothers, from, I think, Azerbaijan, I could be wrong, made pressure cooker bombs and blew them up near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. Wonderful. By that I mean terrorists. Some Azerbaijanis are wonderful. History. Herodotus writes about the Persian Wars, and he does this massive, ethnocultural study of everything from Egyptian barbering habits. He tells all sorts of stories, but he's the one that tells the story of the Persian Wars.
Yeah.
And I know I'm taking your job. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
gosh.
Try not to be too upset.
I don't know if I figured I'd go home.
And Thucydides tells the story of the Peloponnesian War, and Xenophon writes the Anabasis, which is the story of the 10,000 mercenaries. We've got time for a couple of things. The first thing I'm going to show you is based on a Canadian version of a British interpretation of Sophocles' Oedipus called Oedipus Rex. And it's sort of snarky. Yes?
How do you spell the Peloponnesian?
Peloponnesian War. It's in your notes, actually. It's the war between Athens and Sparta. And I'm going to say that tomorrow is the unit exam. So this will be the last video I record for ancient history, I hope, until after Christmas break. So be ready for your unit exam tomorrow. Thank you.